this message is, or this evening's event is now is under recording, and it will be available for all our team members. So we are in fact going to begin with Father John Ruderman, who has some very unique experience. He's one of the very few spots cadets who's gone off and become also Wilson Award winners. So he's done it all in the cadet program, and as well as being with us in the chaplain program. And we're going to ask him, we're going to limit our speakers to 5 minutes or so of their own comments to kind of tell their story of, and what we want is a perspective of what it's like serving in other components of the total force, and what do these other components know about the Civil Air Patrol and about us. We'll start with that question and their backgrounds, and we'll begin the discussion. Father Ruderman, thanks so much for joining us. You should be unmuted, and you're welcome to turn on your video as well. So we'd sure like to see you. Very good.
Hey, thanks, sir. Thanks, Chaplain Miner and Chaplain Murdoch for hosting this. Before I begin, I saw a lot of familiar names on the participant list. I have to give a special shout out to Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel John Tillery. He was my deployed wing chaplain a few years ago. We were together in an undisclosed location in Southwest Asia, and just an awesome, awesome Air Force chaplain, retired now from the active duty, and I see he's active with CAP. So good evening to you, sir. Good to see you. I guess just in terms of Chaplain Miner's first question there, in terms of what the rest of the total force knows of Civil Air Patrol, I guess the good news, bad news is, the bad news first, the answer is not much. They don't know much about us, but the good news is it does seem to be going up. Just over the last few years, I have noticed more people say, oh yeah, I've heard of Civil Air Patrol, or my kid's a cadet, or they've seen us. So I mean, I think that speaks a lot just to our own ability to market. Interestingly enough, right in the Air Force AFIs, we call them, basically our version of the CAP regs and manuals. They're called Air Force Instructions, or AFIs for short. The Chaplain Corps AFIs in the Air Force are all the 52 series. So right in 52-101, 52-101, it makes reference to Civil Air Patrol chaplains. So we do have the attention of the Air Force, of big Air Force, as we say, in the Chaplain Corps. And I find most chaplains, at least, especially by the time someone's become a wing chaplain, they've heard of Civil Air Patrol. They know that Civil Air Patrol has chaplains. They know that there's a way to use them, but I think that's probably about it. I can't say I have ever seen, now I've only been active duty for 7 years. I've been active duty for 7 years. I've never actually seen a Civil Air Patrol chaplain used, although again, it's right there in our AFIs that it is possible. And I've often thought, you know, especially with something like this going on, there are so many opportunities that I think would be great to take a load off of the active duty chaplains, because there's certain things that only we can do, and so many other things that need to get done. That's good work, it's good ministry that needs to happen, that a Civil Air Patrol chaplain totally could do, in my opinion. And it just seems like a bit of an untapped resource. But again, that's a matter of getting the wing chaplains in the active duty world to understand that. So, Chaplain Miner, is that good enough for my first question, or do you have a follow-up on that?
That's fine. Why don't you tell us how you got to your present status as an active duty chaplain?
So I knew I wanted to be Air Force well before I felt a call to the priesthood. I was a cadet in Civil Air Patrol, as you mentioned in my intro. So well before I was even thinking about God, I was thinking about the Air Force. And so then when I did hear a call to the priesthood, the chaplaincy just kind of seemed like a natural way to do both. And so I ended up deciding not to go to the Air Force Academy. I was going to go to the Air Force Academy out of high school, decided not to go there and went into seminary instead, had 4 years of college seminary and then 4 years of graduate seminary. In the Catholic Church, that's kind of the route. If you're going in right out of high school, you have 8 years in residence total. And then got ordained, and then the Catholic Church requires 3 years of ministry before you can go active duty. So graduated high school 2002, 8 years of seminary, was ordained 2010, did 3 years, was ordained for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., born and raised right in D.C., was ordained for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., did 3 years as an associate pastor of a parish in Southern Maryland, and then went active duty as soon as they would let me go, which was right at the 3-year mark. So then went active duty in 2013. So I'm on my third active duty base now. I have orders to move this summer, moving up to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, formerly known Elmendorf Air Force Base, or J-Bear, going up there this summer. Yeah, so for me, it was just kind of a natural combining of being able to serve God and serve country. Or as we say in the Catholic Church, we say it's a vocation within a vocation.
Did you, when did you become a Civil Air Patrol chaplain in that scenario?
Yeah, so interesting question. I actually didn't become a Civil Air Patrol chaplain until I was ready to go active duty, because when I was ordained in 2010 and got out of seminary, graduated seminary, got ordained, and then got assigned to my first parish in Southern Maryland, all throughout seminary, I had still been, I'd been staying active with my home squadron where I grew up as a cadet, and I was the cadet commander of that squadron. I went back, and during seminary, I actually served as the deputy commander for cadets. And of course, you can't be a chaplain and hold a command position. So once I was ordained, the wing commander reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're trying to start a squadron in Southern Maryland where your new parish is. Could you do that?" So I got some people together, and we actually founded a squadron. And so I was the founding commander of a squadron in Southern Maryland. And so then again, I couldn't be a chaplain. It was kind of frustrating for me because I was a fully ordained priest, but the wing was asking me to be a squadron commander. So started a squadron in Southern Maryland, was the first commander. And then when I went active duty after 3 years of that, turned over command to a good friend of mine and was finally able to appoint as a Civil Air Patrol chaplain. I think I became a Civil Air Patrol chaplain about the same time I went active duty. It was 2013.
Great. That's really appreciate your experience. So where did you go? Where was the Air Force chaplaincy school when you went through it, and what was it like for you?
Yeah, so I went through it a few times. So when I first commissioned so they have something called the Chaplain Candidate Program, which is while you are still in seminary, you have to be done with your bachelor's in order to commission, because you have to have a bachelor's to be an officer. So once you finish college seminary, they have this program where while you're in your graduate seminary, while you're in the MDiv program, you can appoint as what's called a chaplain candidate. So you don't wear the chaplain insignia because you're not a chaplain yet, but you are an officer. So you go through OTS during one of your summers when the seminary is not in session. You go through OTS, and then after OTS, you go through chaplain candidate school, which is just a 2-week in residence, how not to embarrass yourself or the chaplain corps, and a very quick introduction to the chaplain corps, just 2-week in residence. I mean, you can get a lot done in 2 weeks in residence, but it was not the full chaplain school. So I did that at Maxwell Air Force Base when the Chaplain Corps College was at Maxwell Air Force Base. And that was in the summer of 2007. And then Congress mandated that all 3 branches do their chaplain schools together. Now, Congress talk about a strict reading of a Congress. Congress said you have to be co-located. It didn't actually say you have to work with each other. And so sure enough, that's what happened. The 3 chaplain schools moved to Fort Jackson, where the Army already had their chaplain school. The Navy moved from Rhode Island, the Air Force moved from Alabama. We went to Fort Jackson, and it was one building, but we didn't do anything together. I think I had one brief from an Army chaplain and one brief from a Navy chaplain, and that was it. We did nothing together. We were simply co-located. And so when I went through my full 6-week chaplain school, once I became an active duty chaplain, was no longer a chaplain candidate, when I actually reappointed as a chaplain in 2013, I had my 6-week in-residence chaplain school at Fort Jackson. And anyways, that was a complete disaster. And so they have, not my chaplain school. Chaplain school was great, but it was a complete disaster trying to co-locate everyone. And so a few years ago, we broke back up, and the Army stayed at Fort Jackson, the Navy went back up to New England, and the Air Force Chaplain Corps College is now back at Maxwell. And when I was there for SOS a few years ago, I got to visit, and it was in the exact same building it was when I was there in 2007. So they moved to Fort Jackson, and they moved back. So long answer to your question, but that's where the Chaplain Corps College is now, back at Maxwell.
Great. One last question before we move on to our next group of speakers, and that's, how prepared do you feel you were for the active duty military with your cadet background in terms of military discipline, customs and courtesies, and what did you have to learn when you went into the active duty military that you didn't know from your Civil Air Patrol background?
I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I want to answer that question by saying not much. I didn't have to learn much because CAP had really prepared me very well. And when I went through OTS in 2007, and then when I went through the chaplain candidate school after that, and then the chaplain school itself in 2013, I already knew how to wear my uniform. I was a cadet. I was on honor guard. I knew how to wear my uniform properly. I was able to call out other people's uniform infractions. Probably not as charitably as I should have. I knew customs and courtesies. I knew the chain of command. And I say that not to brag on me, but to brag on Civil Air Patrol. That Civil Air Patrol did that for me. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people nowadays who even active duty, the number of times I find myself counseling a young airman who, they're facing a situation and they have no idea who they're supposed to talk to. And I'm like, use your chain of command. They're like, well, I've kind of heard of that, but how does that work? So many young airmen don't understand some of those basic concepts. Using your chain of command, starting at the lowest level possible. So anyways, I would say CAP really prepares people well for the military, and especially for the Air Force, but just military in general. You already know all of that stuff going in, and you don't have a very steep learning curve at all.
Great. A quick comment from the person you called out, John. John said, I wrote on his evaluation from our deployment, he was the finest company grade officer I had ever worked with in 24 years of active duty. He was prepared.
Oh, thanks, sir. And I forgive you, Chaplain Tillery, for telling a lie.
All right. Very good. Thanks so much, Father Ruderman. We really appreciate you being with us. I'm going to go ahead and mute you and take off your video. Thank you.
There you go.
Got that taken care of. All right. So our next group of speakers actually is a husband and wife team, currently up in Indiana, Pennsylvania.
Yes, we'll mute the video too.
All right. So there is, let's see, Lindsay and James. I'm assuming you're on the same system. There we are. And both of these chaplains have come up as chaplains through the Civil Air Patrol first before they assumed their current duties. And James Moser is a major in the Civil Air Patrol chaplains program, and has just been picked up for his active duty assignment after being what's called a Category B IMA. And that's part of this learning curve is us learning about what the total is all about. It's not just the Air Force and Civil Air Patrol. We have the Air Force Reserves and the Air National Guard, and many of you already know about that, but some of you don't. And James and Lindsay Moser, his wife, Lindsay was also appointed a chaplain here in the Virginia wing, and has also attended the school down at Maxwell, Air Force chaplain, Category B chaplain. So to the Mosers, thank you so very much for being with us. And I'll ask you each, you are the most recent graduates that we know of through the Maxwell school. So why don't you tell us each a little bit about your programs and your path to where you are now? And again, the same question, were you prepared for what you saw, and what did you have to learn in order to serve in the total force?
All right. Well, as far as my background leading up to ministry, I tell people often with a sort of hand gestures. I used to do academics was a large part of it. I did a little ministry, and slowly I think God changed that. So I ended up doing less academics and more ministry. I was a community college professor for 7 years, began teaching art and art history, and then later religion, and then went from there on the community college level to university lecture and taught some, and completed my MAR, Master of Arts in Religion, and then shortly thereafter my MDiv, the Masters of Divinity. And that's the federal, you could say, requirement for chaplains, just like you have to have an MD or OD to be a physician in the military. To be a chaplain, in most cases, you're going to have an MDiv, a Masters of Divinity. The only odd occasions or exceptions would be maybe if you're a rabbi or Muslim. Some of those chaplains will take a master's in social working, but they still have the background in religion to do it. So that's a big milestone. So if you hear chaplains talk about completing an MDiv, that's very crucial to them getting in, to having that experience. So again, my background just in general was in education on the community college and later university level. And that led me to have good teaching experience, which I used with CAP. I joined CAP as a cadet in high school. And I think with Father John, I looked up dates one time out of curiosity. He said not to brag, but just to wonder. And we were both right around the same time joining in terms of cadets and then staying on in the program. And we're probably the youngest chaplains until my wife came in. And now she's by far the youngest chaplain I know of fully qualified with her MDiv and so on. So education was a big part of my background. And then going into Civil Air Patrol, I joined first the Chaplain Corps as a moral leadership officer. And that was, of course, the first term used before they switched over to a character development instructor. So that was in 2008. I joined as a moral leadership officer. And very much, you could say, like a chaplain candidate sort of program. You were not a chaplain. You didn't wear the badges previously mentioned, but you were around chaplain documents, or you were familiar with the regulations. And so that, along with education, is what got me interested. And then I became a chaplain in Civil Air Patrol in 2012. And then a few years thereafter, became a Air Force Reserve chaplain. I completed an Air Force assigned mission, the AFAM, and that was with the help of Chaplain Minor, and did it unusual, as both Lindsay and I were living overseas at the time in the South Pacific. We were in Auckland, New Zealand, where she studied. I'll let her tell you some more about that, but that's where I did a mission. And so I've served at CAP units as a squadron chaplain, both in the United States and OCONUS outside the continental United States, and did an Air Force assigned mission as a CAP chaplain at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan, and later at Osan Air Base in Korea. And that's later where I was assigned as an IMA, or Individual Mobilization Augmentee, which again, as Chaplain Minor said, is the Category B. So the traditional reservists There's category A, that's sort of like the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year that you often hear about in movies or writings. And then the category B is far less well known, and that is the IMA chaplains, where they can go at 24 days or 30 days at a time and do all theirs together in a big chunk. And this allows for more of an active duty sort of experience and feel. And so I've done that the past few years at Osan Air Base, as well as nearly a year assignment at Maxwell Air Force Base. So it's a little bit of that background, and CAP has definitely come in handy in terms of relating to other people. And a cadet background, when you're relating with young cadets, some of them 16, 17, 18, then you turn around to have airmen who are 18, 19, and 20. You can relate to them. And so I use devotional or character development ideas for starters, as well as the other things that was mentioned about uniforms or customs and courtesies. It comes easy for me. I like a lot of that. And so I've often prided myself on knowing regulations, knowing ribbons and such, because it's a way to relate and it's a way to identify, and you have that bond with people. So that's my experience, and I'll turn it over to Lindsay. I know Osan Air Base has a meaningful part for her role in chaplaincy, so she can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I did not even know what a chaplain was until I met James. And when we were getting to know each other, he was telling me about his involvement in CAP, and I had never heard of CAP either. You know, growing up, I know lots of cadets are involved in that when they are in high school or beyond, but it just wasn't part of my experience. And so I didn't necessarily know anything about CAP, and I'd never considered the military, even though my dad was Navy, as well as my grandfather. It was just something that I'd never considered for myself. But one of the first conversations that James and I really had at length was about his wanting to be a chaplain. And I went home that night and I had to Google what a chaplain was. I had no idea. I had to look it up. I'd never heard the term before. And so I thought it was really cool, but I was on track to become an English professor. I was going to major in English, get my PhD in English. Everything was sort of planned out, and this was my plan. This was what I was going to do. During the time where we were living in New Zealand, in Auckland, where I was getting my master's in English, again, sort of staying on that track, I was able to go with James to Kadena and to Osan. And while he was performing duties for his Air Force assigned mission, I was volunteering in the chapel, sort of like as the chapel secretary. So taking calls, doing tasks around the chapel, getting to know some of the chapel staff and kind of the ins and outs of an atmosphere in a community that I had never really experienced before. And so while at Kadena, I felt like I was able to get a lot of hands-on observation time. We were hosted by chaplains there who took us out to lunch and answered questions. They gave us sort of mini tours of different units of the base, really introducing me, who had been to very few bases previously, to what a base looks like, how the base is divided up into different units, really eye-opening, and really fascinating and compelling. And so when we were at Osan, I started looking into my university because I was studying in New Zealand, but I was also taking courses by correspondence, working on a master's of religion. And the university where I was going had a program where many of those credits could transfer into an MDiv if chaplaincy was a goal for that student. And while at Osan, I had many good conversations with some of the chaplains there who told me about the chaplain candidate program. And again, I didn't know that that was a thing. I thought that you had to already have your degree in hand. You had a commission sort of with that experience. I didn't know that there was a candidacy program for becoming a chaplain in the Air Force. So I felt the call to become a chaplain while at Osan. And so as James said, it holds a special place in my heart. Went home, transferred my credits, enrolled right into my MDiv. And so Chaplain Miner had asked about the school. So I went through the chaplain candidate program starting in 2018. so quite recently, and it's undergone, I think it's always morphing. Something is sort of tweaked or adjusted every year. So it's interesting to hear about candidates who have gone through in previous years. But so I attended my basic training at Maxwell Air Force Base in 2018 after I commissioned in 2017. And CAUT, or the commission officer training, was right before my candidate training. And so we stayed in place at Maxwell Air Force Base for a week as a cohort of chaplain candidates. And then my program was 5 weeks long. So we visited different bases, basically as an introduction to the Air Force and to what chaplains' roles are in the Air Force, and engaging with units, talking with other chaplains, seeing quite a range of both the Air Force missions at different bases, but also how chaplains can engage with those missions. And then I did 2 active duty training tours, one at Nellis Air Force Base and one at Aviano Air Base in Italy. And that was sort of my solo hands-on experience as a chaplain candidate, integrating into the chapel team at both of those bases. And so that's where I got a lot of hands-on experience, familiarization with Air Force terminology, acronyms that you hear all the time. And so really I attribute hearing the call to become a chaplain to CAP, because had James never, brought it up, never mentioned it, and said, oh, I'm in Civil Air Patrol, I want to become a chaplain, I would never, I don't think, have considered that route. So it's crazy how things work out, but that's my story.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And again, the question would be, what were some of the topics you learned down at Maxwell at Chaplain School? What do they teach you that your MDiv programs didn't teach you?
The chaplain course that you initially take, it's called BCC, the Basic Chaplain Course, and this is the first of about 5 courses that you can take at the Air Force Chaplain Corps College, the AFCCC. And I've been in there many times, but as a student and later coming in as a chaplain and a teacher there. And they try and equip you to have sort of the military knowledge brought in with your seminary knowledge or your ministerial experience. So they say, you've done counseling before, but we want you to hear about counseling situations. And I would say a lot of what is taught, which is good, and it goes by quickly. It's a long day. You get there at like 7, stay till 4:30 or 5. A lot of what is taught is experiences from the chaplains there. They'll have 4, 5 field grade officer chaplains, several majors, a couple lieutenant colonels, all chaplains, and they'll tell you about their experiences. To say, I was at a joint base and we had a high ops tempo and very active, and another person will say, I was at a smaller base. And so they tell you about their experiences to sort of tell you what you may experience, whether you're at a big joint base or a small Air Force base, whether you'll be deployed soon or maybe be deployed 7 years from now. All of their experiences are told to you along with examples. And so that's a large part. I would say maybe 50 or 60% is people relaying not just anecdotes, but examples and their personal testimonies about how you do funerals or how you do foxhole type counseling sessions. We all laid on the floor one time underneath the tables, and they said, we're going to purposely be loud out here. They didn't put on sound effects or anything, but almost like that, and turn up volume. And we want you to talk to people and counsel them while you're on your hands and knees under the table. And they say what this is simulating not necessarily a foxhole, but maybe in a lockdown situation, or maybe in a flooded situation, power outage. You've got to be in a confined space for a long time. It's uncomfortable. So now talk and give your testimony to the person next to you or counsel them. And so that's part of it. It's meant to be practical. And that is one aspect. Other aspects are training or certifications they try and give you along the way. So we did ASSIST training, which is a suicide awareness and prevention intervention training. It's a Canadian-based program. And as Lindsay said, they're always changing. So they said, when you come back, or if other people come back, we may have an ASSIST 2, or sort of like Windows 2.0 or so. but they're always trying to give you those examples and then certifications, and then you build up a network. And the classes are usually no larger than about 20 people. They purposely try and keep it small, 18 to 20 people, and that's the basic chaplain course. So bringing together their experiences in the military and trying to tell you how you can use that with your own background. And so that's a large part of it. You also do sort of a mock deployment. We went down to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida just before some hurricanes had hit down there. So it was very much like an emergency situation. So they try and strive to be practical, and that's what they're taught there.
James, as a CAP chaplain on an AFAM to a foreign Air Force base over at Kadena, how were you accepted, and what did they think of that CAP chaplain?
It was very unusual. It was very unusual a case in several ways. One, that I was a CAP chaplain, and two, that it was a very large, as I said, base with high ops tempo, have a very large fighter wing. I've heard it argued back and forth whether it's Osan or Kadena, but some of those are considered like the second largest fighter wing outside the United States. So big time operations going on there. And their wing chaplain, who was an 06, a colonel, as sometimes it can be the case there, had just gone out. He had changed stations. And so they had no chaplain being that far afield. So they actually pulled in a reservist who was a missionary and an IMA chaplain there and a major. And he had graduated from the Air Force Academy, was a line officer, and then switched to later become a chaplain, and then became a IMA reservist. And they had pulled him from being a missionary with Presbyterian Church in Japan to come on board as a temporary wing chaplain. So you had a CAP chaplain, you had a IMA wing chaplain, you had also guard chaplains there. So we were the full picture of the total force, because we actually had chaplains from all four parts of it. How I was accepted, I think once they knew my background, they said, yeah, we can use you and plug you in here. And it was very much based on testimony and how they saw me interact. But some of it is, people say, it's sort of like a trial by fire. They say, okay, we've got a walk-in counselee here, and we've checked your credentials. You've got your MDev, you've got your endorsement, you're fully matched with the backgrounds as an Air Force chaplain. So you need to go in here, and we're going to have you do some walk-in counseling. So we had to be prepared to jump in right away. And at first you're a little nervous, but then you see that you're helping people. And so you build confidence, because you say, they're helping me learn from them, and I'm helping them, hopefully. And so that was a part. So I think I was accepted graciously and helped along, as I say, in an unusual situation, being overseas, working with an IMA reserve chaplain, also a guard chaplain there, and active duty chaplains, and walked into big events and did prayers and invocations, different things, and had on, CAP rank. So people would look at me a little odd at times, but then, was well accepted, and also worked with the CAP overseas squadron there at Kadena with the cadets. So it's very, very unusual, but very rewarding.
Lindsay, what should we do here in CAP for training our chaplains that would have prepared you better for the calling that you took on? And by the way, you're getting accolades on the chat room for hearing your calling and taking it. So what is it that we could do in Civil Air Patrol to better prepare folks like yourself, young folks who are destined for total force chaplaincy? What do we need to do better?
I think something that I have found really helpful from the start has been mentorship. So even integrating an intentional mentoring program would be extremely helpful, I think, because a lot of my mentor relationships have come about organically, and I think for James it's probably been the same way. But whenever I can identify a safe person to ask, stupid lieutenant questions to, who knows that you know, I'm growing into a role as they are. I think that that's always been very helpful. So from the beginning, we were able to interact and engage with active duty chaplains, chaplains who were much more senior, chaplains who were in more positions of authority, as well as reservists and other CAP chaplains. And so getting a picture of the total force ethos through mentoring. Something that the chaplain candidate program also provides that really was helpful for me was lots of mentoring opportunities with my relationships with my active duty supervisor. So I still stay in touch with my supervisor from my very first ADT at Nellis. She and I are good friends, and I've been able to ask her many questions and draw on her experiences now as senior captain about to promote to major. And so I think being able to identify and then pursue intentional opportunities to mentor would be really helpful, even if it's something as simple or as a quick question like, hey, what does this acronym mean? So that when other people are talking, like if I visit a unit as a CAP chaplain on an Air Force assigned mission, and this unit, you know, the folks there are talking and they're using this acronym and they all act as though I know what it means and I know they know what it means, but I really don't. So something as simple as that, I think, can really help build confidence and break down potential barriers that may come up if, you know, as a Civil Air Patrol chaplain, if we go into an Air Force assigned mission or we're helping with a veteran funeral or something like that. It's really helpful to have somebody already in place that we can go to if we do have questions and to continue to grow in the roles that we've taken on.
Yep, I want to thank you both for taking the time to share your stories with us, and for everybody out there. The Mosers are James is accepted his active duty assignment to Tacoma, Washington. So the Washington wing, you're going to pry them out of my hands here, unfortunately, and to your benefit, the Mosers are coming out there. And there actually is a third Moser in this picture that you don't see. This summer, James Stewart Moser will join us, join the family. And congratulations, Lindsay, and to James on your new arrival very, very soon. So.
Yeah. I will add today, since it's a special day here in Indiana, Pennsylvania, is Jimmy Stewart's hometown. And today passed in the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania. It's actually Jimmy Stewart Day. This is his birthday. So it's a very auspicious occasion. So
very good. Well, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Very good. Mute you. Chaplain Bobby, your turn, sir. So let's bring up your video here if we can. Chaplain Bobby, you there, sir?
Yes.
Very good. You want to? Can we see you, or you can stay in the dark if you want?
Oh, I don't know. You hit that start my video or what?
Yes, hit that start video. Let's see you.
Well, what's going on here?
That's fine. While he's doing that, Chaplain Bobby is on an what must be almost like a full-time AFAM mission down at Pope, and several years ago was our distinguished military chaplain at the Military Chaplains Association. He is also as a member of the Pope Chapel program, the recipient of the Robert Preston Taylor Award in the Air Force, which is given to small chapel programs. So he actually has the Robert Preston, and for those of you who know, Chaplain, Major General Chaplain Robert Preston Taylor is the founding active duty chaplain of the Civil Air Patrol program. He was the active duty chaplain that came in and created and basically stood up the Civil Air Patrol program. So congratulations, Chaplain Bobby, for your very successful AFAM mission. And so why don't you tell us about what you're doing and how you're related to the community down there at Pope on your AFAM?
Well, I'll just tell you, I'm a retired Army chaplain, which was a a little different thing. I had no idea what CAP Chaplain was until I finally joined under the auspices of a special forces colonel who wanted me to go over with the Fayetteville squadron as a chaplain. And so he talked me and I joined CAP. Didn't know a lot about it, but I also had a couple of advantages as a former military. I knew a lot about the military, a lot about the customs and courtesies, and so I got into Pope through a friend of mine. First of all, right after I retired, I joined a mission agency called Cadence Internationals. Some of you may already know that. And I went to Panama, the Republic of Panama, along with my wife and my daughter. And we had 3-year ministry there, came back to Fort Bragg, Fayetteville area, started the Cadence ministry here. And as part of that ministry, we attended the Pope Chapel. Got to know some of the chaplains there who were in the service, and the congregation, a lot of retired Air Force people. And so when I joined CAP, about, let's see, I've been at Pope now 17 years, and got to be pretty good friends with Don DeCostin, who retired Chief of Chaplains of the Air Force. And Dondi, we got liked me for some reason or other, but so he said, "I'd like you to come here and help and work at CAP." I said, "Well, could I do that?" I saw it in the regulations that you could do that. He said, "Yeah, I'd like you to come help." So he did all the paperwork. He went to the lawyers, the JAG people, and got it all okayed, and we agreed on 20 hours a week, a minimum 20 hours a week. And so that's how I started out there at Pope. I have to say I didn't know a lot about the acronyms for the Air Force. A lot of people did not know. The other chaplains I worked with didn't know what CAP was. But because Dondi was the senior chaplain, I guess they said, okay, we'll go with him. And so that's how I started. And then I, just before Dondi left, he said, "I'd like you to especially work with our Flying Tigers, the A-10 guys." And I said, okay. So I went in there and started talking to them. I didn't know how I'd be accepted as a former Army chaplain. But one of my humorous, if it is humorous, all the air people have pilots have a nickname, special nickname. So I went in there and I'd meet somebody and I'd say, "Well, you guys have nicknames." But I don't have a nickname like that. But I said, when I was in college, I had a nickname. And they said, "Oh, what did they call you?" I said, "They call me 014. And they say, 014, why do they call you that? I said, "Because I was twice as good as 007. Funny. But they said, "Oh, this guy must be, he's okay. He's humorous." So, and I'm a learner. I learned a lot from good mentors. Cherry Wheeler, I had Don DeCostin, Ken Reyes, a number of others, and it worked with good chaplains, and learned to accept me and knew I could do something, and so I was a great visiting chaplain. I visited in almost all the different units, but especially I worked with the A-10s for almost 6 years. So it was, like most people are saying, a lot of people did not know what a CAP chaplain was. Some thought we were like something like the Boy Scouts, senior Boy Scouts type of thing. And it's, from my point, you really have to, in one way, sell yourself. And they get to know you, they get to see you, get to talk to you. They gave me pretty much freedom, but a few things were they didn't put me in the church bulletin, the chapel bulletin, even though I was doing things in there, because they said, well, if we put your name in there, we may lose a chaplain slot, active duty chaplain slot. I said, well, do whatever you need to do. But the first, I think I put like 2,000 some hours my first year there, and won the Pope Air Force Base Volunteer of the Year Award, won the 43rd Air Wing Award. And so I had to learn a lot, but I kept on learning and kept on going, and trying to make good contacts, and still learning. I still have to figure out all the acronyms, what goes on where, but that in a nutshell, and whatever you need to ask me here.
Well, that's fine. And I think you talked again, the word mentor continues to come up, that having an active duty mentor was important to you, to get you through as a learning process. And the same question would be, what should we do in the Civil Air Patrol to prepare our people for AFAM missions and going forward? What do you think we should do? Anything different?
Well, like I said, I think in CAP, learn to not only just look at CAP people, see if talk to some Air Force people, and get to know them, ask them questions. If you're interested, ask them questions. Be a learner. Don't think you know everything. And so I really had such a great, it's hard to explain, a great time at Pope Air Force Base, and then when we went downsized to the Army Airfield, still have a ministry, because I'm a former Army chaplain. I've had great relationship with the Army chaplains there too, and act sort of as a liaison in some ways, but each time I always had permission to do things. I didn't just go out and do something on my own, because I'm a former military guy now. I wanted to learn, and I was so thankful that the airmen, especially the pilots where I worked with, accepted me as their chaplain. Then there was a big hubbub at one time about, well, he can go out and but he can't go visit. They didn't want, this came from somebody in AMC, that they can't visit airmen. And the AMC chaplain came, actually a couple of different ones. AMC chaplain said, here was my meeting with them, and they asked me. They said, Chaplain Bobby, I just want you to do what you've been doing. Keep doing it. I said, but he said, don't worry about that. Keep on doing what you've been doing. So.
Very good. Well, thank you so very much for being with us. I really appreciate that. Again, the whole idea for this evening was to begin to explore what AFAMs are about. For my own background, and I'll just mention this briefly, I'm on an AFAM here Marine Corps Base Quantico, where I'm the headquarters chaplain for the OSI, the Air Force's version of the FBI, or NCIS for those of you who watch television. So essentially, they needed a chaplain, and since I wear the blue suit, and they've asked me to do all the Air Force, as many Air Force funerals as they need a chaplain for at the Quantico National Cemetery. And that leads into several unique missions. One was I was actually called across the state to deliver the death notification to the family of a sailor killed on the USS Fitzgerald several years ago. And that was a very unique mission to actually be wearing my Air Force Civil Air Patrol uniform to deliver a death notification of an active duty sailor with a naval officer in rural Virginia. And when the chief of the Navy chaplains got wind of that a Civil Air Patrol chaplain was actually going to be the one to do the funeral, they insisted that a Navy chaplain had to stand beside me, that they weren't going to let the Air Force uniform be the only one officiating. So I had to co-officiate the memorial service and the funeral for this young seaman killed on the Fitzgerald. Another unique thing happened last year, and Chaplain Murdoch, rather than me talk about it, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and that's I had the privilege to officiate a full military honor funeral at Arlington National Cemetery last year, which was a very unique set of circumstances, I guess, for a Civil Air Patrol chaplain to get the privilege to do that. Chaplain Murdoch, you also had that privilege, so I'm going to turn the microphone back to you and let you describe what you thought about doing a funeral at Arlington Cemetery. I surprised you with this. Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay. I don't see that my camera's working, but am I on? My mic's going?
Your mic's going great.
All right. I had the privilege of doing a funeral at Arlington Cemetery. I've done two there. I was the assistant endorser for our Fellowship of Churches, and my endorser was a retired 06 Air Force chaplain. He passed away, and I was asked to do the service, and I did so as a CAP chaplain in uniform. And one of the things that I realized quickly is if we get involved in doing military funerals, they are totally different than civilian funerals. And you have a certain amount of time. At that time, there were only 30 minutes in the chapel and less than that at the grave. And they had, as you were moving out of the chapel at Fort Myer, they were bringing another funeral into the chapel, the people coming in. It was just because of the way things were going and how fast they had to keep the funerals functioning. I had an Air Force officer who was the chaplain there, a full bird colonel. Ed Brogan is his name. And Ed and I became quick friends and good friends. In fact, we were both endorsers. He was endorsing for the Presbyterian Church, and then he followed me a little bit later. I was the president of the Military Chaplains Association of the United States, and then Ed came in a little bit later after I was there and was also there. So we've kind of walked through things together from Arlington forward, and we had a very good relationship. We had the opportunity to do the service and also do the presentation at the grave. And so there were various aspects of it that I took my own briefings on. I had to have a briefing to be able to do it, and Ed and I worked through that very well. There was the aspect of the honors and all of the aspects of that, marching from the chapel to the grave site, the aspect of doing the service at the grave, the honors salutes, the folding of the flag, all of the above. Now, one of the things that I was impressed with, and something you need to be aware of, is that if you do a military funeral, you do not know who's in that congregation and who's there to be with the family as they are grieving. And it is tremendously important for you to understand what the procedures are so that, that you're aware of what's going on, because you will be watched. And it just so happened, my funeral was attended by the chief of chaplains of all three branches, and they were all involved. In fact, the Air Force chief of chaplains at that time was Chaplain Baldwin, and he presented the flag to the widow. But all these things are there, and you need to be aware of how that's working. And that's why we want to do some training in those areas, so that when you're there and get the people like our active duty folks who have already done this, some of us who have already walked through this as well, so we can help you understand how to do these funerals, because of the high, every one of them will be a high visibility funeral. And so you need to be aware of that. And it's a great privilege to be able to do that. So that's a few of the things that I picked up real fast, and was very, I have to tell you, I was so moved after I preached the service. And by the way, the service was only about 15, 20 minutes because there are other things we had to pull in there. I came out and I wasn't prepared. I knew there would be the case on, but they had the band and the honor flights that were there. And as they were playing hymns, great hymns of the faith, and putting his casket on the, I just lost the name, the case on, and I found myself saluting and tears coming down my face as everything, the emotion of the time was all right there. But very honorable opportunity. And maybe if you, Tim, if there's some other things you would like to know about, or have I fairly well covered that?
That's fine. It was just an introduction to back to you. Our first hour is over, and I really only scheduled this for an hour, although we can keep going for as long as folks want. We certainly have a number of folks on chat who talked about all their different experiences. With your permission, sir, I'm going to ask everybody who's online and in the chat room to please, if you've already served on an AFAM mission, even if that mission is over, let us know what your experience is, and so that we can record it. Where did you serve on an AFAM mission previously in the Civil Air Patrol? And so we can just kind of, again, capture that. A number of you did that during the skill survey we did. And perhaps, Chaplain Murdoch, you might want to explain why we did that skill survey. What was the interest in Civil Air Patrol chaplaincy that this session is the legacy of that initial thing? What happened? Why did we do that?
I want to thank everybody that participated in that survey. I was asked by the chief of chaplains when I was in DC for the NACMAF meetings, National Conference on Ministry to the Armed Forces, and with the Endorsers Conference for Veterans Affairs Chaplaincy, etc. Had the chance to spend some time with the Chief of Chaplains of the Air Force in his office and walking through introductions and things along those lines. But we were talking about how the Civil Air Patrol Chaplain Corps could assist the Air Force Chaplain Corps on some of these types of missions. And as a result of that, I was able to go back in February when we went back in for legislative days. I spent a number of hours with his staff then talking about some of these issues as well, and had the privilege of being able to interact with them. Also, as a result of that, when this COVID situation came up, they were looking for what we had available and how we could assist. And so all of the things that fell into that questionnaire were set up so that I would be able to give the Chief of Chaplains of the Air Force a rundown of how many of our chaplains were able to do specific things, where they were, and some of that type of information. We had a wonderful opportunity, and maybe Tim, if you have that material right at your fingertips, you can share just a couple of ideas of, I think we had like 280 some chaplains respond out of 350, which is unheard of I am thrilled and thank you so much. But also, we had so many that had military experience, so many were retired military chaplains, so many were had MDivs, how many had doctoral degrees, just a number of different types of information. Where people were located, they were keenly aware once we gave them uh, locations that I had chaplains within these guidelines where we could get people to help them. They were just thrilled that we were able to give that information. As I sent that up, I was getting very good responses back from the Air Force. And so I've developed a very good relationship with them as well as with First Air Force and the chaplain at First Air Force. And so we're excited about what the future holds. And that was the reason we had that background and the questionnaire go out.
Great, thank you very much. Question came up in the chat room. How many folks do we have on AFAM missions? And from the skill survey, we had 7 folks currently on an volunteer that they're on an AFAM right now. A number have said they have served on it, and so that answers the one particular question. Sir, where do you see AFAMs going for us in the future?
I believe that the door's wide open. I'm walking right now through some other challenges and some other opportunities that are coming our direction with regard to the possibility of our Civil Air Patrol chaplains supporting various types of missions. And you folk can be in prayer for me as we walk through this, because doors are opening as a result of this, of our training, as a result of people becoming aware of what we are able to do. I see a lot of things happening. We had a Red Cross ask us if we could help support, and we were not able to support that specific mission, but at least they were willing to ask us and see what we could do. And so the Chaplain Corps is making its name known, and we're getting a number of different types of missions that are becoming available. And so I see a lot of things happening under the AFAM in the very near future.
So a question comes up, what is going to be your policy on waivered Civil Air Patrol chaplains? Will they be allowed to serve on AFAM missions?
That is all still being worked through, and there are a number of things that we are working on. And at this point, I can say that we are working to be able to do that. We just have to see what is going to happen with the end results. So we are working that issue as we speak.
All right. Well, sir, I guess right now I'll just, are there any questions through the chat room? Or again, you're welcome to text me at 571-212-0804 if you're on the phone. But any question for any of our speakers, or if that you would like to ask the chief? Sir, what do you think of this idea of having more of these kinds of sessions in the future? Chaplain Murdoch, what do you think of having these kinds of sessions on a regular basis?
I'm sorry, I thought you were throwing that out to everybody.
No, I'm throwing it out to you. I mean, what do you think of what we just did this evening? And
I think it's great, and I would encourage us to do something if we can do it quarterly to get started. If we find a good enough response that we want to do it more frequently, we can. I think it would depend on the topic, but I think pulling all of us together and being able to do something along these lines are extremely helpful. And maybe we can even get to a specific area. This has been foundational, but when we pull a specific thing like how to do a military funeral, we will spend more focus on that type of an issue and other specific things. So I am very pleased about how this has gone. I'm excited about it. I stand ready to support and encourage that we do this again and continue.
great. Just some announcements. and the responses on the chat forum are all very positive about asking for more, sir. So we'll have to talk about the next topics. And now that I've recorded everybody who's here, and we had 78 of our chaplains on the call, although we had 100 registered, but there are 78 who've appeared at one time in the audience with us. So it's a very, very good opportunity to chat. Certainly the largest forum I've seen of chaplains in Civil Air Patrol in the few years that I've been in the program.
Question, Tim. Are you able to capture the things from the chat room so that we can go through that information as well?
Yes, sir. This whole screen has been captured and recorded, and the whole thing is being recorded right now on my computer. So I can actually create a video out of this and actually use it for sharing in the future, including all the ideas coming up in the chat room.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Then some announcements coming up. We do have 3 different virtual chaplain staff colleges coming up. We have at the end next week the Mid-Atlantic region in June, the middle of June. I think, let's see, the Great Lakes region is doing theirs. And they're only going to do 10 hours, and then the next 10 hours comes throughout the month of July when we have the National Regional Staff College using this very similar sort of format, and it's all going to be at the 18 list. And Chaplain Murdoch is, on your behalf, I'm pleased to announce that the National Commander will actually appear at our National Regional Staff College. So you'll have the opportunity to actually interface with the National Commander as he talks to us as well. So that will be in the month of July. And the idea is to make the sessions as small as possible, several times a week over the entire month, and perhaps even duplicating some of the sessions so that if you miss one or have to miss one, you can make it up. And perhaps there's a reason why we gathered your names for this one, because there's 1 hour of training might be valuable sometime in the future, I suspect. So let me see here. A question just came up over my cell phone. Do we have an Air Force support component in the new program? Air Force support component in the new program. I'm assuming we have an Air Force support component in the new program. I'm not quite sure what that means. Chaplain Murdoch, does that question perhaps?
I think I just saw it pop up. I think what he's saying is we do have that. I think he's referring to the AFAM aspect of the chess program.
Okay.
And that is being developed as we speak. And so part of that is still on hold because I need to be able to get down to Maxwell and sit down with the Air Force Chaplain School and walk through some of those things with the commandant at the Chaplain School for the Air Force. And so that segment, I know that we've advertised the 3 different segments of the chess program, but that segment is on hold until I'm able to get things finalized with the Chief of Chaplains and the Commandant of the Chaplain School of the Air Force, so that what I would like them to be aware of is that we are being trained to what standards they would like us to be trained to. And so that's what I'm working right now with them.
Okay, very good. Well, let's see. So unless there's any other questions coming forward, then we've been 1 hour, 15 minutes. And thank you very much for hosting this and for allowing us to begin the dialogue about where we see seeing this go in the future. So again, on behalf of, I'll turn the last gavel over to you. You may dismiss us at your leisure, sir.
Well, thank you to everyone. This has been an exciting time. I'm glad that you took the time to be able to be a part of this. I wish I had a big enough screen that we could throw everybody's picture up and have 78 of us here, but I don't have a screen big enough to do that. But well, it would do it, but you'd all be the size of a postage stamp. So that's not going to be a whole lot of help. But the reality is we're thrilled to use this forum to reach out. You know, up until this COVID thing, we were trying to figure out how can we communicate with people, and the COVID pandemic has just forced us into thinking outside the box. And this is happening, and I'm excited about it. I'm glad that you're a part of it, and it's an honor to be your chief and to help guide through this time frame. I want you to be aware I pray for you, and I am open to your interaction with me, and we look forward to doing more of this. And thank you so much. Let me have a word of prayer with you, and then I'll turn it back to Tim. Father, thank you for this opportunity of learning. Thank you for each of our chaplains that have been a part of this. I pray that you will reach out and use them in a powerful way, meet their needs, and help them as they meet the needs of others. We pray this in your holy name. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have further questions on this topic and would like to reach out, send me a question, send me an email. You all know how to reach me, I'm sure. And I'll make sure that the right person throughout the Chaplain Corps gets back to you on your answer. That's really the whole goal here, is to be an information source, and there should never be a question that you have that. So if you have a question, we'll find the answer. So please ask away now or at any time in the future. Thanks so much. On behalf of Chaplain Murdoch and the entire Chaplain Corps, thanks for playing with us, and thank you for your ministry and your service. Sir, you can wrap the gavel and we're out of here. I'll press the end button.
God bless. Good night.
Good night, sir.